Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, Prime Minister, the negotiations to leave the European Union begin. It's a historic moment for our country. In what ways will Britain be a better country for leaving the European Union?
Well, you're absolutely right, Andrew, that this is a historic moment for our country. We're putting into place now the decision that was taken in the referendum of the 23rd of June last year to leave the European Union. And the formal process has begun. I've written to, as they say, invoke this Article 50 that people will have heard about, which starts the process of formal negotiations. As we look ahead to the outcome of those negotiations, I believe that we should be optimistic as a country about what we can achieve. I think when people voted last June, what they voted for was for us to be in control of our borders, in control of our laws. But I think people also voted for change in the country. And that's why, alongside the work that we're doing on Brexit, I'm clear that the government has a plan for Britain to build a more outward-looking country, a stronger economy where everyone plays by the same rules, fairer society where success is based on merit but not on privilege, and to ensure we're a more united nation and somewhere that children and grandchildren can be proud to call home.
But we couldn't have been better in all these ways and remained in the European Union?
Well, the British people decided that they wanted to come out of the European Union. And I think when they made that vote, when they gave that very clear message to us as politicians, I think what they wanted to see was the United Kingdom making its own decisions and not feeling that decisions were being taken in Brussels. It's in the letter that I've sent to trigger this formal process today, I make the point that we're not rejecting Europe, we're not rejecting values of democracy and European values. What we are saying is that it's about our national self-determination as the United Kingdom. It's about us having control.
All right, you've mentioned in control several times. So let me start with immigration. And I do that because for many people, the scale of immigration over the past 10 years was a major reason, not the only reason, but a major reason why they voted to leave. So can the people who voted that way, can they be reassured that immigration will be significantly lower after Brexit?
Well, you're right. For a lot of people, when they voted last year, immigration was one of the issues that was key in their minds. Again, I think what they wanted to know was that it was the UK government was taking control of our borders, that decisions will be made here in the UK. Now, obviously, we want to see net migration coming down. We've been able to put rules in place in relation to people coming here to the UK from outside the European Union. Now, as a result of leaving the EU, when we leave, we'll be able to put rules in place, decided here, about the basis on which people can come from inside the European Union.
But will immigration be significantly lower after Brexit?
Well, I think what we will see a difference in the number of people coming in. But I was Home Secretary for 6 years. And when you look at immigration, you constantly have to look at this issue because there are so many variables, so many different things that can happen in the world that affect the numbers of people trying to come here to the UK. What we will be able to do as a result of leaving the EU is to have control of our borders, is to set those rules for people coming from inside the European Union into the UK. We haven't been able to do that, so we'll be able to have control on those numbers, set the rules for that, as we've been able to set the rules for others in the past.
So what will the rules be for EU citizens coming here in the future?
Well, we're looking at the moment at what we think should be right, and we will be actually bringing forward a bill in Parliament in due course which will set out our proposals. There's, if you like, a couple of issues around people from the European Union. Of course, there are quite a few people from the European Union living here in the UK already. Some of them will have been here for a considerable period of time, others will have come more recently. One of the things I want to be able to do is to give them reassurance about their future, but I only want to do that when I know that those UK citizens who've moved over to countries in the European Union are also going to have that reassurance and those guarantees.
I understand that, but what I'm talking about is the future, for people coming here in the future from the EU. I mean, would you envisage, for example, as part of a Brexit deal, that there would still be some sort of preference for EU citizens who want to come and work here?
Well, what I'm clear about is that there will still be opportunities for people to come to the UK from the EU, but we will bring forward specific proposals on what the rules should be in due course, and those will go through our Parliament. Those will be looked at by members of Parliament, and we'll decide what those rules should be. We want to make sure, of course, that our economy is still strong. We see many people here working in our economy, working in our public sector. We want to make sure that we still have that strong economy, but people want us to be in control, and that's the important thing, and that's what we will be doing.
But the Conservatives promised to cut net migration to 100,000 a year 7 years ago. 7 years ago. You're still nowhere near that figure. Indeed, non-EU migration, people coming from beyond the EU, that migration alone is well over 100,000 a year. You must understand why people are sceptical about anything you say on immigration.
Well, if you look at what's happened to those migration figures, those net migration figures, over the last 7 years, they went up, they've come down, they've gone up again, and they've now started to come down. They are higher than we want them to be.
Almost
and
3 times higher.
You're absolutely right about them being higher than we want them to be. But that's why what I've just said is so important, that in immigration, you can't just set one set of rules and think that's the answer and you go away and forget about it. Actually, you have constantly to be looking at this, constantly working at it, constantly saying, have we got the rules right?
But you cannot, I would suggest, reduce net migration to 100,000 without major cuts in both EU and non-EU migration. Isn't that right? We
need to continue to look across the board, as well as introducing rules for people from the European Union. We also need to continue to looking across the board. But there's something else we need to do as a country, of course, which is to make sure that people here in the UK have the skills they need to take the jobs here, so that businesses don't feel they have to reach out overseas to bring people in all the time.
Just one final thing on the immigration, though. The British economy has done better than most forecasters said at the time of the referendum, and it continues to do pretty well this year. What happens if we continue to do well and you need more than 100,000 migrants a year? Would you let that in? Would you let them in? One
of the things that I think, as I've just said, is crucial for us as we look to our economy for the future is for us to make sure that people here in the UK are getting the training, the education, the skills they need to be able to take on the jobs for that growing economy in the future. That's why, as a government, we are putting more money into technical education, for example, ensuring that young people have the opportunity to get the skills they need. I want to see a high-paid, high-skilled economy in the future, but we need to ensure that young people today are going to be able to take those jobs tomorrow.
The EU's talked of a one-off, multi-billion-pound exit fee. Some have suggested it could be as much as £50 billion, maybe more. Would you contemplate a sum anything like that?
When people voted last year, I think one of the things they voted for was to ensure that in the future, outside the EU, we're not paying significant sums of money on an annual basis into the European Union. Of course, we have to look at the rights and obligations we have as a member of the EU. While we continue to be a member until we leave, we will carry on paying according to the obligations we have as a member.
But will we pay an exit fee of anything like 50 billion?
Well, as we look at the negotiations, of course, we have to decide what the obligations are. But what I'm very clear about is that what people want to see is that in the future we'll be making decisions about our budget, we'll be deciding not to pay those sums of money every year into the European Union.
I understand that. We may decide to continue with some programmes and we'd make a contribution to that even after we leave. But I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an exit fee that the EU is talking about, is demanding almost, and it's around 50 billion. So I ask again, is that in the ballpark that you would contemplate?
Well, you talk about an exit fee that the EU is demanding. There's been a lot of speculation. Actually, there isn't a formal demand. The negotiations haven't started yet. I'm very clear about what the people here in the UK expect, but I'm also clear that we're a law-abiding nation. We will meet obligations that we have. And as a member, as I say, until the point at which we leave, of course, we'll be continuing to pay according to the rights and obligations of that membership.
I mean, many people watching this will wonder, we're leaving. Why should we pay anything at all to leave?
Well, we're not talking about paying to leave. We will be leaving the European Union. What we're talking about is ensuring that when we leave, first of all, when we leave, people will see that we'll be taking decisions about our budget. We won't be being required to make significant payments every year into the EU's budget. As you say, there may be some particular programmes we want to be members of, that we wish to pay in order to be members of, because it will be in the national interest to do that, and that's what will drive us.
But the European Union is talking about a divorce bill. Mr. Barnier, the head negotiator, is talking about a divorce bill. Are we prepared to pay a divorce bill?
Well, as I say, there has been a lot of speculation and a lot of comment
He's the lead
about these comments. We're not in the negotiations yet. We're not. We will start those formal negotiations soon. We've done the first step, which is triggering Article 50. And as I've said, you know, the UK's a law-abiding nation. We will look at the rights and obligations that we have.
You mentioned already the importance of EU citizens in the UK and UK citizens in the EU, and they would like to be reassured about their future. Do you believe that you can resolve and announce this quickly?
Well, one of the things I've put in the letter to President Tusk is precisely that I want to get an early agreement about this. And sometimes people say to me, as you have, that EU citizens here are concerned about their future, and of course they are, and I recognise that. But as UK Prime Minister, I need to think about UK citizens who are living abroad as well.
And I mentioned them, Prime Minister.
And so I want a reciprocal.
Both be reassured quickly?
Well, I want a reciprocal agreement in terms of guaranteeing status of EU citizens and UK citizens, and I've said that I think that this should be done at an early stage. I believe from the talks I've had with other leaders that there is a goodwill there, that there are those who recognise the importance of giving people reassurance, and I think we will be able to address this as one of the early things that we talk about in the negotiations.
By early, could it be this summer?
Well, I don't want to put a date on it, but I want it to be as early as possible, precisely because, as you have just said, people are worried about their futures. I think it's only fair to work to give them reassurance as soon as we can.
You believe that Brexit means we can no longer be members of the single market. Why?
Because the other leaders in Europe have made very clear that what they use this term, the four freedoms, and they're indivisible, they go together. So what are they? Well, it's the importance of free movement, and of course we've said we want to control movement from the EU. It's the membership of the single market entails accepting that free movement. It also entails accepting the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. These are exactly things that people voted to reject when they voted to leave the European Union. And so I've accepted that we can't have that membership of the single market, because to do it would mean accepting things that the voters have said they don't want. But what we can do, I believe, is to get a really good trade agreement with the European Union in terms of access for our businesses to their single market, and of course for their businesses to our market.
But do you accept that no matter how good a free trade deal you're going to get, and I accept you're going to try and get the best you can, no matter how good it can't be as good as the unrestricted access we currently enjoy as members of the single market?
Well, I believe that what we'll be working for, and what I believe we can get, is a comprehensive free trade agreement. We would like to see as frictionless and free trade as possible, tariff-free across borders, so that we can continue that trade with the European Union.
But it can't be as good, can it?
Well, it will be a different relationship. That's the point. It will be a different relationship, because it won't be a relationship based on membership of the single market and based on accepting all the other things that voters rejected. What it will be is saying that we want that new partnership with the EU, we still want to work with you, we want to cooperate with you, and actually getting a trade agreement isn't just about the UK, it's not just about our businesses, it's about businesses in other countries being able to trade with us. So I think it's in the interests of both sides to agree a really good deal.
I understand that, but your Brexit Minister, David Davis, he said that there will be a free trade deal which will deliver the exact same benefits we enjoy now. You and I know that cannot be true, The European Union will never agree to the exact same benefits.
What we're both looking for is that comprehensive free trade agreement which gives that ability to trade freely into the European single market.
But it can't be the exact same benefits,
and for them to trade with us. It will be a different relationship, but I think it can have the same benefits in terms of that free access to trade.
When we leave the EU, we end our membership of, I think, about 40 pan-European agencies and other arrangements in science, security, air travel, healthcare. I just want to ask you about two specific ones. One's a very timely one, given the events in Westminster last week. Will our membership of Europol, the police Europe-wide service, will that continue post-Brexit?
Well, that's one of the things that we will have to negotiate as part of the negotiations.
Do you want to?
Because I think
remain member?
I think security cooperation in a number of crime and justice matters is important for us. It's not just Europol, there are some other things. There are systems about exchanging information about people crossing borders, for example, which I think are valuable to us and valuable to the other countries.
But would you like to remain a member of Europol?
I would like to be able to maintain the degree of cooperation on these matters that we have currently. I've argued before for exactly this when a couple of years ago when we were looking at these justice and home affairs matters. I think it is important for us and I want us to be able to continue that degree of cooperation, but it will be part of the package of negotiations because, of course, at the moment, when we leave the European Union, unless we've negotiated still to be members of those sorts of organisations and arrangements, our membership will lapse.
And if it lapses, would we cease to share information with Europol?
Well, we wouldn't be able to access information in the same way as we would as a member. So it's important, I think, that we're able to negotiate a continuing relationship that enables us to work together in the way that we have. As I've said, right at the moment, and of course this was very much brought home to us in London last week, right at the moment, now is not a time, given the threats that we face across Europe, for us to see less cooperation in this area. We want to continue that cooperation and build on it.
Let me ask you another question, but something concerns people. Will UK citizens still be eligible for free access to healthcare across the EU through the European Health Insurance Card?
Well, that also will be a matter that will be part of the negotiations.
But will
in terms
it be your
of the
aim
movement,
to secure that?
We will be, I mean, there are two issues. There's the issue of people who are currently resident in European Union member states and the rights that they have, and then, of course, the rights that people will have as they move across Europe. We want to get the best possible deal for citizens here in the United Kingdom. I want to get the best possible deal for everybody in whatever part of the United Kingdom they're living.
To continue the
but we have a whole raft of negotiations that we have to go through, a whole raft of issues that we will be looking at in relation to these matters. And of course we need the flexibility of being able to deal with those issues. And the relationship will be different in the future.
Of course.
It's not necessarily a question of saying, are we going to replicate this or replicate that? Actually, we will have a different relationship with Europe.
Well, you talk about a whole raft of things that have to be decided and a different relationship. Now, you need to negotiate our divorce terms. That's highly controversial. You want a new free trade deal for goods and services. That's highly complicated. You want new crime-fighting arrangements, new health arrangements. You need to repatriate 50 international trade agreements. Then you have to have it all ratified by 27 other countries, as well as our own. All in under 2 years. That's just not possible, Prime Minister, is it?
It's challenging, but I think it is possible. And the reason I think it is possible is this, Andrew. Well, there's two reasons. First of all, I think it's possible because with goodwill on both sides, I think both sides recognise that it's in our interests to make sure that we get these arrangements in place so that when we leave, we've got that trade arrangement, we know what it is going to be. There may be a period of implementation after the point of withdrawal, but that we know what that arrangement is. So everybody's certain about what where the future lies. So it's in both sides' interests to do this. But the other reason why I think it's possible is because, of course, we're not a third country in the sense of a country that's never been part of the European Union. We're not suddenly knocking at the door saying we want all of these things. We've been part of the EU. We've been operating on the same basis with them. So I think that puts us in a different position for the future and makes it easier for us to negotiate these arrangements than it would if we were coming at it completely fresh.
Do you rule out a transitional period where some things, even after we leave, still remain to be resolved?
What I want is, by the end of the 2 years, everybody to know what the withdrawal agreement is and what the future relationship is. That deep, what I've called today, a deep and special partnership with the EU, because we're still part of Europe. We still want to work with them and cooperate with them. I want that agreed by the end of the 2 years. I think that's possible. But it may be that there have to be a period of implementation thereafter as people adjust, as businesses adjust, as governments adjust to whatever the new arrangements are.
And if there is a transitional period, or as you call it, an implementation period, would that still involve the free movement of people and being under the jurisdiction of the European Court? Or do both these things have to end in 2 years' time?
We want to make sure that we are ending the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice, and that we are able to control movement of people coming from the European Union.
Years.
We want to have the agreements done in 2 years. There may, as I say, then be a period from which we're implementing those arrangements. Just as a very simple example, you know, if there are different visa arrangements that need to be put in place, the government here and governments elsewhere will have to have their systems working so that those can operate. So there may be a period where we've got to implement the decisions that have been taken.
You said in the event of no deal, we may have to change Britain's economic model. What does that mean?
Well, on the no deal, I've said that no deal, first of all, I think would be better than a bad deal. We don't want to see a bad deal. And I say that because I think there are some people in Europe who talk about punishing the UK, and I don't want to sign up to an agreement which is based on that. And then there are others here who perhaps feel that we should be so keen to get an agreement that we might sign up to things that the British people rejected when they voted to leave the European Union.
But what does a different economic model mean? That was my question.
Well, if we, what I've said in the letter today is that if we don't get a deal, then we would go on to what are called these WTO, the World Trade Organization, arrangements for trading. And what, in those circumstances, I've made clear in the letter, that's not what we should want.
No,
it's not in either of our... Can I just make... I'll come to the point about the economic model. But it's not in either side's interests, I think, to have those arrangements. It's not just about us, it's about the EU as well. But of course, whatever comes out, we want to ensure we continue to have a competitive economy. And that's what we would be looking at.
But what does a different economic model mean? I asked for a third time. What does it mean?
Well, we would take decisions at the time as to what we felt was necessary to keep our economy competitive, to keep jobs here in the United Kingdom, to make sure that we were putting in place the arrangements for business that kept those jobs and so forth.
Don't you do that anyway?
Well, we do work to do that, but if
I'm not sure what a new economic model is. I mean, Labour says it's a tax haven.
No, it's what we're talking about. Look, Labour set up all sorts of sort of straw men about what this might be in the future. What it's about is making sure that jobs stay here in the UK and that new jobs are created here in the UK. What it's about is making sure we've got that economy that enables people to have those high-paid, high-skilled jobs, and that we're ensuring that young people here have got those skills for the future.
Let me just ask you one rather important question. If we don't get a deal, will that jeopardise our existing cooperation against crime and terrorism with our European partners? If there's no deal, will that weaken it?
Well, if I can separate those two out, because on some of the cooperation we have with them on terrorism, that takes place outside the European Union and outside the structures of the European Union. But if we don't get a deal on the sort of security arrangements, the sort of criminal justice things I was talking about earlier, the exchange of information at our borders, then I think that's one of the reasons why I think we should aim not to be in the position of getting no deal, but in the position of getting a good deal, because I think that cooperation is important to us.
We're leaving the customs union. Ireland is not. Do you accept that must mean checks on the Irish border?
We are very clear, both I've talked to the government in the Republic, the Taoiseach, about this. We're very clear we don't want to see a return to the borders of the past, and we're working very closely with the Irish government about the arrangements that can be put in place to ensure a frictionless border, in a practical sense, a frictionless border for goods and services and people travelling between Northern Ireland and the Republic.
The Leave campaign promised a Brexit dividend of £350 million a week, much of which they said could be spent on the NHS. How big do you think the Brexit dividend will be? And should the lion's share go to the NHS?
Well, what I think is that what people want is what they voted for is for the UK to be able to decide how it spends its budget, for us not to be spending those significant sums of money every year, paying those into the European Union, paying those into Brussels. Right. So when we leave, we will have control of that money, and we will decide how we spend that money. I think that's what people want to.
How big will it be? Will it be anything like 350 million a week?
Well, we will be, as part of the negotiations, we'll be ensuring that we're not paying those significant sums in the future. We will then be able to see what the size of that dividend will be, and then determine how that money is spent, what we're going to do with that. There's lots of things that we need to think about.
But it was the NHS on the side of the bus, Prime Minister, during the referendum.
That was, during the referendum, there were points made, often very passionately, on both sides of the argument. We're now beyond the referendum. We're now at the point where we're putting this into practice, where we're starting what are going to be complex, challenging, but I think achievable negotiations. And I'm optimistic about what we can achieve in the future. What people voted for is for us to have control, and that's what we'll have.
You've rejected the demands of Scotland's First Minister for a second independence referendum. You say now is not the time. But what about when you've done the Brexit deal, when we know what the nature of Brexit is? Would you still rule out a second Scottish referendum?
Well, the comments that I'm getting from the Scottish Government and from the SNP in Parliament at the moment are that they want a confirmation now that they're going to have a second independence referendum. What I'm saying is, I think now is not the time for a second independence referendum, and I think now is not the time to be focusing on a second independence referendum.
I understand that too. I accept you don't like the timing, but what about later? What about when the Brexit deal is done? The Scots can see what it looks like then. They voted to remain in the EU. They should then, people will argue, have a second decision. Are you against it in principle?
If I can just explain why I've said now is not the time, because I think this is relevant to the wider question. I think now is not the time to focus on a second independence referendum, or to be looking at that second independence referendum, because, for two reasons. Now is the time when we need to pull together as a United Kingdom. We need to be talking about how we can work together to get the best possible deal for everybody across the whole of the United Kingdom.
I understand that.
And focusing on an independence referendum isn't about doing that.
But do you rule it out?
And that's why it's so important for us to ensure that we do focus on the future.
But do you rule it out in principle?
And also, I think it's important that we recognise... Well, I think, Andrew, the question isn't whether there could be a second independence referendum, it's whether there should be. And I think, you know, the people of Scotland voted in 2014. They voted to stay part of the United Kingdom. The SNP themselves described it as a once-in-a-generation, indeed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to vote for independence. The people gave their message, I think, just as we're respecting the referendum that took place here last year on EU membership, so we should all respect the 2014 Scotland referendum.
During the referendum, you said, I believe it is clearly in our national interest to remain a member of the EU. Now you say Brexit will, quote, build a better Britain. Who's the real Theresa May? Is it Theresa May the Remainer or Theresa May the Leaver? Well,
I did campaign for Remain, and I did vote to Remain. But I also said that I didn't think the sky would fall in if we left the European Union, and it hasn't.
But it's involved you doing the mother of all U-turns, hasn't it?
It's now my job. Well, my job, I've been put in a position as Prime Minister, I believe, to respect the wishes of the people of the United Kingdom in that referendum. I believe it's my job now to deliver the best possible future for the UK. That's why I have... It's not just about Brexit, it's about my plan for Britain. It's about a more outward-looking Britain, a stronger economy, a fairer society, and a more united nation. And it's taking that forward, which is about building a brighter future for everybody in the UK.
So if it is for the will of the British people, when you do the deal, when it's clear the terms of which we'll leave the EU, why would you not take that to the country, either in a second referendum or go to the country in a general election and get the people to vote for the deal that you do? Why not?
Well, what I've said is that when we have the deal, there will be a vote in the UK Parliament. Of course, there will be votes in parliaments across Europe because there will need to be a ratification process. I believe that's the right way to do it, to say to the UK Parliament, this is your opportunity to vote for this deal.
You won't take it to the country.
But I'm confident that we're going to get a deal that is going to be good for the British people. The British people have basically said to us, go on and get on with it. We want to leave the EU, go out there, get the deal, get on with it, and that's what we're going to do.
Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you.
That was me speaking earlier to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, on the day that she triggered Article 50, beginning the formal negotiations that will lead to Britain's departure from the European Union in 2 years' time. For the next half hour, I'm going to be talking to a number of other party leaders about what they want to see from the negotiations and how they see Britain after Brexit. I'm joined now by the Leader of the Opposition, Jeremy Corbyn. Welcome to the programme, Mr.
Thank you,
Corbyn.
Andrew.
Your Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, has said Brexit offers, quote, enormous opportunities. What are these opportunities?
Well, the opportunities are the opportunities that we all want to take, which is of an investment-led economy, is of higher wages, is of a good quality manufacturing industry and a good trading relationship with Europe, because after all, approximately half of all our trade, both manufacturing and services, is with the European Union at the present time. And many of our industries, as you know, are closely interlinked with production across the continent.
So don't we have all these opportunities if we wish to take them at the moment? I don't understand how leaving the EU improves these opportunities.
The changes would be that the European Union would not be able to influence an economic model. One of my concerns I expressed about reform of the European Union was its way it wanted to prevent governments intervening to protect industries, and I think governments should intervene to protect industries. Some are better at it than others, but actually the reality is we're leaving the European Union, so let's look to the relationship with Europe in the future and the way in which the government is going to pursue those negotiations.
So more state intervention after Brexit if there was a Labour government, more state intervention in industry.
I've always said this because I do think we need to have an investment-led economy. We do less investment than most countries in the OECD and certainly most across the European Union. We need to invest in high-tech manufacturing industries and sustainable industries and jobs. We have great levels of inequality in Britain, amongst the greatest in Europe, and the Prime Minister today is talking about the possibility of trading under WTO rules on failure to reach an agreement with Europe. That would be pretty catastrophic for most of our industries.
You've set out 6 tests, the Labour Party, for Theresa May in the negotiation process. One of them is, as I was saying to the Prime Minister, the exact same benefits as we currently enjoy as members of the single market. Now, as I said to her, I say to you, you know that's mission impossible.
Well, David Davis said this in the House on, I think, the 24th of January.
Doesn't make it right.
No, David Davis says many things. This is very
So why
true.
have you made it one of your tests?
Because it's a test on the government. The government are saying that they will achieve that. That's our test to them. Now, how do you achieve it? Well, you achieve it by the basis of which you trade within the European market. And I'll give you an example. I mentioned industries. Car industry, 1.5 million engines made in Britain by Ford, 500,000 cars made in Britain, 1 million engines have to go to Europe to be put into cars. The same with Airbus, same with Rolls-Royce, same with lots of companies. There is a huge integration. That integration has to continue, otherwise it's very hard to see how those big industries are going to remain in Britain.
Do you believe we should remain members of the single market?
I don't think we can be members of the single market if we're not members of the European Union. So the issue is one of access to the single market.
So it's
an
a free
agreement.
trade deal.
It's an agreement which would be a trade deal with Europe.
So
yes.
on that, your policy is the same as the government's?
Our policy is that we would move might and main to make sure we have that trade relationship, and we would not be threatening, which is what the Prime Minister was doing in the latter part of her interview, of saying, well, if we've got to trade under WTO rules, World Trade Organization rules in the future, we might adopt our own economic model, which can only lead to lower levels of taxation and all the problems that come with that.
But you both agreed
corporate
that
taxation.
You both agreed we need a free trade agreement post membership of the EU. Should we remain members of the customs union?
The customs union is the trade arrangement for the rest of the world. If we remain members of the customs union, then we have the same trading relationships with the rest of the world, i.e. fixed agreements on tariffs from outside Europe, as the EU
does. So should we remain a member?
I suspect we're not going to be allowed to remain a member, so that means we've got to then develop our own trade policies with the rest of the world. And this is where it becomes very complicated, because if we can't trade with the rest of the world under current agreements and we have to develop new trade arrangements, it becomes very complicated.
So again, on the customs union the broad principle of the policy is the same as the government.
Norway, for example, is not a member of the EU, but does follow the customs union rules and has trade on that basis.
No, Norway's in the single market, but it's not a member of the customs
No, it's
union.
not a member of it, but it does follow those.
But you agree
bases.
with the government that we can't be in the customs union, even if we wanted to be. You say we should honour our obligations in leaving the EU. It's the so-called divorce settlement. Do you think that that would come anywhere near the £50 billion that
Well,
the EU's talking about?
I'm not really sure where this 50 billion figure comes from. There are obviously issues about ongoing commitments to staff and,
Of course,
and
which the
things
Prime
like
Minister
this,
talked about, but as I
which
said,
would
that's
talk
a different matter.
But there's the other way around, is the agreements that have been made with the European Union for example, capital investment programmes on our railways in the southwest and southeast Wales. All those agreements, we either have to pick them up and fund them ourselves or carry on through European funding. So all that's got to be set against the costs. But
So is it
I don't know where this 50 billion figure comes
so
from.
could you imagine it being close to 50
No,
billion?
no, I couldn't.
If the Prime Minister doesn't meet all 6 of your tests, will Labour vote against the final deal when it comes before Parliament?
Keir Starmer's made our position very clear on this in his speech at Chatham House on Monday, that we set down those points. Those are our points about protection of jobs, protection of conditions, trade arrangements with the European Union. Right. And obviously, if those aren't met, then we will not support it. We would vote against it.
And you would vote against it?
Yeah.
Even if the consequence of that would mean that we would crash out, in your words, on WTO rules.
This is where the pressure from the Labour Party and opposition to the government of ensuring 2 things. One is there is a final vote in the British Parliament because the government didn't want that. And secondly, there is regular reporting to the British Parliament. We will be holding them to account all the way through. And if there's not likely to be an agreement, then surely the obvious thing to do from both the point of view of the 27 other countries, Commission and Parliament and us, is to continue those negotiations by an extension. And within Article 50 there is provision to continue negotiations beyond 2. You need all 27 to agree to
and
it.
if
This
they
is
didn't,
true.
what would happen?
Well, if it didn't, you'd have to argue very strongly with them. But I have done my best to reach out to colleagues in socialist parties in every one of the 27 member states to do 2 things. One is to help us reach a sensible agreement with Europe, but also to help protect British nationals living in their
But
countries.
not many of your socialist colleagues are in government in Europe.
Some are.
Not many.
Well, some
So
are,
they're not
but they're
decisive.
still a factor in politics. They're still a factor in those
Sure, but they're not
parliaments.
in government.
Well-
Would you support a second referendum on the outcome of negotiations?
At the moment, no, I wouldn't. I don't see I see we've made a decision in this referendum, and I think it's been put to politicians and the Parliament to deal with the issue. And we campaigned for a Remain vote. That was not successful in the end. The country voted to leave. We respect the result of the referendum, and we want to be able to speak for the entire country in holding the government to account. People might have voted to leave the European Union. They didn't vote themselves out of a job at the same time.
Now, both you and the Prime Minister were Remainers in the referendum campaign. Mrs May, as you heard there, now sounds like an enthusiast for Brexit. You said before the referendum you were 7 out of 10 on staying in the EU. How much are you out of 10 now on leaving?
Well, we're leaving, so...
Are you 10 out of 10?
Well, there isn't a debate because we are leaving.
But are you becoming enthusiastic like her?
Am I becoming enthusiastic like her? No, I'm not as enthusiastic like her. What I'm
About Brexit, I mean.
No, Brexit is happening. There is no debate about it. It is happening. It's a question of how we leave and the terms in which we leave and the relationship we have with Europe in the future. My concern in the referendum was that I wanted to see, as I said in one of your earlier questions, a reformed European Union. I wanted much more of a social Europe and much more equality across the continent, because that is a problem. But there is also huge issues facing this country on inequality, poverty and injustice, which we have to face.
What controls, because if and when we leave, we will have to devise a number of policies which we haven't had to as members. One of them is on immigration from the European Union. At the moment there is free movement because that's a condition of membership of the EU and the single market. What controls would you place on migration from the EU post-Brexit?
Well, it depends what the trade deal is, quite clearly, and what insistence is put there. But Britain has benefited greatly from European workers here. Our health service relies on them. Many of our high-tech industries do. And indeed British workers all across Europe. So there's going to always be quite a big movement across the borders, and I think we have to accept that.
But would
and
you put any
welcome that.
Would you put any controls on it?
What I would do is end the process of agencies recruiting people to come into this country and undercut construction workers, undercut people in call centres and factories, and make sure that there is local advertising of jobs and proper wages and conditions rather than the undercutting that goes on. But let's be serious about this. Our country is an industrial country, as well as having service industries and agricultural industries. All of those, in part, need European workers to keep them going, as indeed British workers across Europe do.
Would you have any controls on EU migration to the UK?
Well, clearly, under any future arrangement, there will have to be an agreement on British people going to work in Europe and European people coming to work in Britain. But we're going to always have a close relationship because everybody, me absolutely, is signed up to the concept that all EU nationals currently resident here must have a permanent right of residence. They have families, and family reunion issues will take place. So there's always going to be a lot of movement.
I understand that of the people here, and I asked the Prime Minister about that, but I just want to be clear. Would the movement of people, in your view, when we leave the EU, would it really be any different from where it is now?
I suspect it will probably be different because both sides would have a debate about that. But actually, we're 2 years away from this decision.
But you don't have a policy designed yet, will you?
We will be consulting on this and working out a policy proposal on this. And quite obviously, at the moment, the issue is one of the terms of trade with Europe and protection of EU nationals here and British nationals living in other parts of Europe.
Your Shadow Home Secretary, Diane Abbott, she says free movement is a worker's right. Now, you're very big on workers' rights, so you wouldn't really want to take that away, would you?
She supports the principle that workers should be able to seek the best job that they can, and that is what goes on at the present time. My point and her point, and I'm sure she would agree with this, she was on this programme, is the way in which groups of workers, particularly from 2 or 3 Eastern European countries, have been grotesquely exploited in this country. That is a shame on us, and it's terrible for them.
Scotland voted to remain in the EU in the referendum. The Scottish Government was elected with a second referendum in its manifesto. The Scottish Parliament has voted for one this very week. Would you deny the Scots a second referendum?
I don't think the Westminster Parliament should block a referendum once it's been proposed by the Scottish Parliament. I'm not actually in favour of a second referendum, and I think the economic arguments in Scotland are very serious and very strong. There's a 15 billion gap between Scottish taxation income and the requirements of Scottish public services. And so I've made that argument in Scotland at the Scottish Labour Party conference and other places.
You would grant the First Minister a referendum then in her time
She
scale?
has made, the Parliament rather, not she. The Parliament has made the reference to it, has agreed that it wants to do it. I don't support that, but I think under devolution, we agreed devolution in 1997. I don't think Westminster should block it, but I think there should be a serious discussion about the timing of it, because if the referendum occurs during the Brexit negotiations, it becomes a bit complicated.
I understand
and also,
that, but
Scotland would not necessarily be able to join the EU.
Would you back Miss Sturgeon's timetable, which she said from the end of 18 to the beginning of 19, or not?
I would say that it shouldn't take place, if it takes place, until after the Brexit negotiations have been completed.
Like Scotland, Northern Ireland voted to remain. Now, you've been a huge supporter of a united Ireland in the past. Is it time for a referendum on that?
I think we have to recognise that there is going to be an enormous complication about Northern Ireland border with the Republic after the exit from the European Union. Nobody wants a hard border. Everybody wants to support the Belfast Agreement. The Belfast Agreement is built in to the whole European Union arrangements, and so there's going to have to be an agreement on movement of people and goods across the border between the Republic and the six
Would
counties.
you welcome a referendum on a united Ireland?
That's up to the people of Northern Ireland to
Would you
decide whether they
support
want
it
a
if there
referendum.
was?
If the Northern Ireland Assembly wants to have one, then they should be allowed to. But I do think the important thing now is to reach an agreement to ensure that the good relationship between the six counties and the Republic continues, and
that the border stays open.
well, and the border is absolutely open so that people can freely move across it.
Jeremy Corbyn, thank you.
Thank you.
So that's the view of the Leader of the Opposition, but what do some of the other political parties in England want to see from the Brexit negotiations? The Liberal Democrats say Britain's best chance to succeed is within the EU. They support a second referendum at the end of the negotiating process because they argue people voted for departure but not for a destination. They're also campaigning for Britain to remain a member of the single market. UKIP says the party will hold the government's feet to the fire over Brexit. They've laid out 6 tests for the deal between the UK and the EU to ensure that leave means leave. These include no divorce payment with the EU, a significant fall in net migration, and the Brexit deal finalised by 2019. The Green Party position is to campaign against what they call an extreme Brexit. They say they'll oppose any measures taken to turn the UK into a tax haven or take away the rights of UK and EU citizens. They also support a second referendum on the terms of the deal of Britain's future relationship with the EU. I'm joined now by the Liberal Democrat leader, Tim Farron, the UKIP leader, Paul Nuttall, and the co-leader of the Green Party, Jonathan Bartley. Welcome to you all. Tim Farron, are you out to reverse the decision this country took on June the 23rd?
No, I don't want a rerun of the referendum we had last June. It was narrow, but there was a majority for Britain leaving the European Union. However, that was a vote on departure, not on destination. As the detail of the deal becomes more clear, Theresa May doesn't know what that detail is, so how can any of us be expected to know? Fair enough, but at the end, this deal will either be signed off and agreed by politicians, or it should be signed off by the people, and the Liberal Democrats have the view that the people should have the final say on the destination, which at the moment is unclear.
So you think that when the government, if the government comes to a deal on our terms of Brexit, that should be put to the people in a second referendum?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be pedantic, but a first referendum on the deal, because no one's had sight of that
But you know
deal.
what I mean.
I do, and it's of real significance, because let's be honest, at the moment, we do not know what it will look like. We have various equivocations of the Prime Minister tonight, the extent to which immigration would be controlled, the extent to which we would have a relationship with the single market, all of those things. Obviously, the Liberal Democrats believe we should fight to be members of the single market. All those things are up for grabs, and we're expected to allow a stitch-up between civil servants and politicians in Brussels and in Whitehall to decide our future for the next 50 years. Liberal Democrats think the people should have the final say, and if we don't like what the government comes back with, we should be allowed to remain in the European Union.
If the Prime Minister succeeded, you will have read her letter to the EU. If she succeeded in all the aims she sets out in that, come the final deal, would you support that?
Extremely unlikely. I can't imagine that there's a deal
But
on
would you?
offer for the United Kingdom that is as good as the one we've got now in the European Union.
but that wasn't my question.
There are better deals to be had than the one that she's seeking.
Okay.
The weakness of her position is shown in the fact that the really big thing she should be seeking is membership of the single market.
How can you remain
And
members of the single market and then not be subject to free movement rules and the jurisdiction of the ECJ? In other words, you're still a member of the EU.
So, two things. First of all, we know Norway and Switzerland, for example, are members of the single market and non-members of the European Union. And is there
But they're subject to the
certainty?
jurisdiction by one court removed of the ECJ.
And that's certainly the case. And first of all, I would defend freedom of movement. However, if you are listening to anything that's coming out of the capitals of the other European Union countries at the moment, you will be hearing governments which are prepared to compromise on that issue. And if Theresa May really wanted to fight for what was in Britain's interest, i.e. that we stay in the single market, she will find that if she had the courage of those convictions, she may well get what she wanted. She's sadly not even fighting that battle at all. She's basically playing to the likes of Paul.
Well, let me come to Paul Nuttall. What did the Prime Minister say today with which you disagree?
Very little, actually. I think that she's talking the talk, but then again, Theresa May's always been very good at this kind of thing, but when it comes to walking the walk, she generally fails. I find very little that I disagree with the Prime Minister today.
So we don't really, you've described yourself as the guard dog of Brexit.
Yes.
But we don't need a guard dog.
Yes, you do.
Particularly one with no MPs. I mean, you're a guard dog without teeth, aren't you?
Well, hang on. Firstly, I mean, I'm not convinced that the Prime Minister won't start bartering things away. I think, for example, the fishing industry may well go first and foremost. But as I say, you know, in terms of not having an MP anymore, because Douglas Carswell left on Saturday, it doesn't really matter. If you think, Andrew, we forced the then Prime Minister, David Cameron, into giving a referendum that he never wanted to give when we had no representation in the House of Commons. And
you won, job done.
Well, we've won, but, you know, as I say, there's a 2-year process now. We've got to be there, we've got to be electorally strong, and we've got to ensure that the Prime Minister doesn't begin to barter things away.
The Green Party talks about an extreme Brexit, not just a hard Brexit. Tim Farron talks about hard. You go one further, talking about extreme.
Talk about fundamentalist Brexit. Right?
Outdoing each other on the Brexit stakes. Now, you had the Prime Minister today, and you had the conciliatory response from Donald Tusk, the head of the EU Council. What was extreme about any of that?
Well, you just have to look at what's on offer. You know, an end to freedom of movement. I'm absolutely passionate about freedom of movement. I will defend it to my dying day. I think my children would benefit from it. I enjoyed it. My children aren't going to get it.
But it's not extreme to be against it, is it? I mean, most people voted against, not to stop people coming, but they voted against free movement.
That was not on offer in the referendum, and I think we should be absolutely clear. No, it was about political arrangements. No, they didn't. There were plenty of people, some people in the Conservative Party that were on the Leave side saying it wouldn't be an end to freedom of movement. I mean, Tim's just highlighted how alternative arrangements would allow freedom of movement. Absolutely, yes.
You thought that people voted to leave, but still knew that even leaving wouldn't mean the end of uncontrolled?
Yeah, if you still got access to the single market, as we've been discussing, that was one of the options, you'd still have freedom of movement. You just said it yourself, Andrew.
Well, actually, I didn't, but never mind.
I misheard.
Let me come back to Tim Farron here. The Prime Minister says Brexit will build a better Britain. That's her aim. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, says Britain will be weaker once we leave what he calls the beautiful EU. Are you with Mr. Juncker rather than Mrs. May?
Well, I certainly take the view that Britain is going to be better if it's part of that family of nations that we've been in for the last 40-odd years, and being in the European Union is something that I'm passionately in favour of. The fact that we lost the referendum means that I respect the outcome, but it doesn't mean I've changed my view.
Do you respect the outcome, though? If you saw a chance to reverse it, you would, wouldn't you?
Only by democratic means.
Oh, of course.
Democracy
I'm
did
not
not
saying
end.
you're going to mount a coup.
Good. I'm glad that particular accusation is off the table. I'm pleased to be exonerated. But to be fair, not the courts and not Parliament. Right. The British people should have the right to look at the deal, say we like it, in which case I'll put my hands up and say that's it, we're out. Or that we actually have the chance to remain in the EU.
The whole point about the referendum was people getting back control and people being part of a process that began with the referendum and didn't just stop there. It wasn't like suddenly the 48% had to suck it up and the 52% get everything. You know, it was about, there were 48% of people that were voting for a different vision. Now, if Theresa May is serious about uniting the country and not treating people with contempt, as I believe that she is, she should be listening to those people and everyone and taking them with her, and not having this extreme version of Brexit.
Hang on, quickly. You know, if we went down your line, Tim, and we had, you know, we committed to another referendum at the end on the deal, I can guarantee to you now that the European Union would ensure that we got the worst deal possible to ensure that we voted to stay in and reject it. So I think what this is a game to ensure that we stay in.
Let Tim Farron answer that.
In the end, unbelievably, it is a complex situation that we have found ourselves in. That is the doing of David Cameron, who put as a kind of half-baked referendum to the public, where it was just departure and not destination. And the reality is that whatever happens, we're in a weak position. She's already started off giving away our membership of the single market.
But if she announced she was going to have a second referendum, would she not be in an even weaker position, because the European Union would have an incentive to give us a bad deal so that we voted against it?
So I think that what we've got from Theresa May at the moment is the handing of the initiative to the European Union anyway, by saying we don't even want to fight for our right to be in the single market.
It worse.
I don't buy that at all. I don't see how democracy makes it worse. And the reality is,
for the reason
respecting the result of the referendum means that she's got the right to negotiate Brexit. She absolutely has.
But hang on,
but the point that Jonathan was getting on at the moment, or just a moment ago, is absolutely spot on. If you had inherited, as she did as Prime Minister, a almost dead heat, a narrow win for Leave, then you would seek a consensual Brexit. You would, OK, negotiate exit from the European Union, but you would maintain your place in the single market. And the point is, you would get howls of protest from Paul Nuttall.
We need to have some fair time here, Paul Nuttall.
But Tim, you know, the point is, we're talking about the single market as if it's the be-all and end-all. It's not. You know, it's a shrinking economic bloc. At the moment, we're doing less trade with the European Union year on year, more with the rest of the world. And being out ensures that we can sign our own free trade deals with countries like America, China, India, and the rest of the world. No, because the EU signs them on our behalf, and once we leave, we can take back our seat on the World Trade Organization.
Jonathan Bartley, I need to hear from you.
It's two parties talking about trade deals, they're talking about the single market, and what we're forgetting about is people. And not one mention so far from any politician about climate change and the environment. Not one mention in Theresa May's speech about it. Nothing from Jeremy Corbyn. Nothing in Jeremy Corbyn's 6 tests. And this is the biggest issue that's facing my children's future, all our futures, is climate change.
Well, now we know that the Green Party, and I understand why.
But you know we've got this great.
But let me bring you back to, because you're in favour of our second referendum, a referendum on the deal too, like the Lib Dems, correct?
Yes, we are.
What would happen if people voted no?
Well, presumably you put a pause on it and you listen to the people. I mean, surely it is about the people. It's about people being sovereign, and you listen to what the people are saying. And you take a long, hard look at it. Well, at that point, you need to stay where you are, and you need to either go back and say, do you want to look again at the terms of a deal? Because this is an extreme Brexit that we've been forced, not what people voted
said,
for.
I'm sorry, you triggered Article 50. Time's running out.
Well, see, this is the fascinating thing. It's why I'm bringing a court case through Dublin to the European Court right now, is to get
another court case.
Let me just finish this point, because it's important, because we've started on triggering Article 50 and not knowing how we could stop it. If there's a financial crisis, for example, if things go very, very wrong, how could we pause it? And there are so many unknowns, and this is the biggest decision that we're going to make for a generation. The Prime Minister is taking us into it without knowing how she could kind of push the button to stop it if she needed to.
Right.
It hasn't been thought
The good news, here's the silver lining, if you're somebody who thinks that triggering Article 50 is a sad occasion. The EU today confirmed in writing that Article 50 is revocable within the 2 years by the UK without anybody stopping us elsewhere in the EU. And that's important, because what Theresa May has basically done today is jump out of a plane without a parachute, and thankfully the EU has just chucked us a parachute. And I think it's up to the British people in the end. If they do not like the deal she gets, surely they have the right to say thanks, but no thanks, we will stay put.
Aren't you in the position, though, that you and your party, to have traction for your views, you need the Brexit talks to fail, don't you?
Well, I want us to do as good as possible as a country out
of
those negotiations. I don't. I want us to be as close to Europe as humanly possible. If we believe the rhetoric that Theresa May has come out with today, then she apparently wants that too, and we want a deal going forward that allows us to stay close
but surely
to
your
Europe.
position is that you want them to fail, because if they fail, you can reopen the issue again, and perhaps this time get your way, win this time rather than losing last time. And if they don't fail, you don't win.
Yeah, don't get me wrong here. I mean, my sense is that the European Union, and indeed the Commission in particular, has got lots wrong with it. And I've spent most of my time in politics being somebody who's genuinely sceptical about what the Commission does. But the idea of Europe, the unity of 28 countries that were once at war, and on the other side the Iron Curtain relatively recently, that is massively important. So whether we succeed or fail in the negotiations, the idea of Europe and European countries working together is a good thing.
Given your attitude, for you, surely no deal is the best deal for you.
No, do you know what? I will put country over party, and I want the best deal for Britain, and that means controlling our own borders by reducing immigration, doing away with freedom of movement. It means control of our own waters. It means not paying a membership fee anymore. It's able to sign our own free trade deals around the globe and ensuring that 100% of our laws are made in this country and not in Brussels.
I mean, in a sense, you're on the other side of the Tim Farron coin, because you need Brexit to be a betrayal to maintain any electoral relevance.
Do you know, I do think she'll barter things away. I don't think that she'll go through with what she's saying.
So you need it to be a betrayal.
However, I want her to do so. I'm willing her to do so, because I would always put my country above party.
And is she going to do so?
I don't think she will, no.
If you were putting
You don't?
No,
So you think it will be a betrayal?
Well, I think, you look at her record as Home Secretary, she's always good at talking the talk. When it comes to walking the walk, she generally fails.
If you were putting your country
I've only
first,
got
you wouldn't
30
voluntarily,
seconds.
you wouldn't voluntarily
So I'm
jump
going
out
to
of
give
the
you the
single
final
market.
word, but it has to be
Okay,
brief.
I don't agree with Tim on tuition fees. I don't agree with him on this particular point. I think we've got to see the big vision here.
So you're
Which
in
is
favour of
about the
tuition fees,
kind...
'cause I voted against it.
I'm in favour of
Which is it?
a big vision for Britain, where we see where we're actually going. This is bigger than Brexit. This issue is about our future, it's
On the
about our
bigger
children.
vision, we're now out of vision. But I thank all three of you for joining us tonight. That's it for this evening. I thank all my guests for joining us on this day that saw Britain begin its official departure from the European Union. Good night.
That's all, folks.